What's up, dudes? This is Crewdog Gamer recording another video today, and it's another video in the playlist that I'm calling Fishing Planet for Dummies. It's a comprehensive guide to Fishing Planet, and I wanted to cover one of my favorite lures, one of the most effective lures in the game, the crankbait. As you can see here, I've hooked up a 6-foot crankbait with a 5/0 hook on it, and I'm going to run you through what all that shit means, what you need to be crankbait fishing, all that good stuff. So let's go ahead and dive into exactly what the crankbaits are. They're a continuous action bait, so you never stop reeling. Some people say you can do a stop and go with them, but I've never really had much luck with that. But they're meant to imitate fish, so things that are going to be feeding on live fish such as largemouth bass, smallmouth bass, steelhead, chinook salmon, striped bass, gar, they'll all go for crankbaits. Even the catfish in Louisiana will go for crankbaits, even though I can't really seem to catch anything on any of the other maps as far as catfish go with a crankbait. So this is not going to be a long video because crankbaits are insanely simple. So my crankbait rod is my Galaxy Cast 8.6 Sport, which is an extra heavy rod with a moderate action. Moderate action means that rod has a lot of flex in it, which means that lure is going to look better in the water. It also means you have more bend in the rod, you can load it a little more, you can cast a little further, which is good for crankbaits because you can cover a lot of water with them. I don't use a high gear ratio reel for this. Like here, I've got a 4-2-1, that's a good one for it. I like the 6-2-1 the most because I can cover a little bit more water without reeling it as fast. But I really won't go up to the 6-5-1. I'll try and stick right above the 6s. The 6-4-1's a good crank rod, or a good crank reel. That's what I'd like to fish it on. As far as line goes, obviously you want to match your line to your reel and your rod, whatever their capabilities are as far as drag and max line weight. And I'm fishing it with braid right now because I was fishing in Florida and I needed that higher tensile strength without taking up as much space on the reel. But really fluorocarbon I think is what shines the most with crankbaits. It's clear, it's harder for the fish to see, which I'm not really entirely sure that matters in this game, but in real life anyways, fluorocarbon is where you want to be running it, or at least braid with fluor. Anyways, that's all real life fishing stuff. But if you have a big enough reel, I'd say go to fluorocarbon. You should still be able to cast really far with it, and you should be able to cover a lot of ground with this lure, regardless of the line. So let's cover what all these fucking numbers mean on our crankbaits here, because you see I've got all kinds of different numbers and stuff on all these crankbaits, and let's talk about the colors, what exactly they represent. So if I'm fishing in a more, let's cover numbers first. So in every crankbait you'll see a foot rating, or if you're in the metric system you'll see a meter rating, and then you'll see a hook size rating. So it'll describe it down here. You've got a floating depth, so when you reel that, or not a floating depth, but a depth, when you reel that bait, that is the depth it should achieve, is 12 feet. So where all that matters is when you're looking at different water channels, especially when you start fishing shallower waters and even deeper waters like in Alberta, white moose, the depth of your bait really matters, because it's the difference between whether these fish, biting 3 feet from the surface, or they biting 6 feet, 12 feet, all the way down to 30 feet. Like, what depth is going to catch them best? So if you take that into account, like how deep you usually catch a fish, then these will all work. Now usually the middle of the water is the best place for the crankbait to be. So if it's 60-foot deep water, I'll throw a 30-foot crankbait. If it's 12-foot deep water, I'll throw a 6-foot crankbait. I usually just cut that in half, and that's about right. And I'll adjust that a few feet up or down, whether I go to an 8-foot or a 16-foot. It just depends whether I want to be closer to the bottom, closer to the middle, or closer to the top. So that's what all that means, right? And then we've got our hook sizes. Obviously a 2/0 is smaller than a 4/0, which is bigger than a 3/0. The lower the number, these are all an 0 hooks. You're not going to find a number 3 crankbait in this game. You're going to find a 2/0 or a 3/0 crankbait. Now, all these different colors here represent different stuff. The rainbow is more bluegilly, kind of, if we throw it up there. It's a little more bluegilly, and it works really well in natural places where a bluegill will spawn a fair amount, or it's not really a good shad imitator, but it is what it is. You know, this one will work well in places like the Everglades. I don't really use crankbaits in mud water, but they'll work there. Up in New York is a good place for them. That's where I like to throw my rainbows. Now, the one I like to use here in California is the perch color, which is obviously imitating a perch. And then you've got your blue and white, which is more of a shad imitator. So if you go look at what your fish like to eat, you can usually match a color up to that. And of course, cloud cover matters in a lot of this too. If it's a cloudier day, I'd rather throw a perch than a rainbow, just because it's darker. And usually I'll go with a darker or more gray bait whenever it's cloudy. And then we've got lemon. As far as this goes, I have no fucking clue what it's trying to imitate, but it does work quite well in a lot of places. And you can just switch crankbait colors around, and you'll be able to figure out what fish you're biting on, right? What fish want to eat. So like right now I'm fishing with I don't know what's happening here. Let's get that a second. Right now I'm fishing with a 6-foot 5/0 perch colored crankbait, which is one of the ones I like to use here. I also like to use the shad. The shad's a very good one for California, for the striped bass and stuff like that, blue and white. Even the lemon one is usually pretty effective around here. So what you want to do is, I know the water is about 6 to 10 feet deep around these rocks, right? So I'm going to match that up with a 6-foot crankbait to hit whatever channel I can find in here. And if I'm fishing with over a 6 on my retrieve, like my gear ratio, I'm going to stick to a 1. So I know the water is about, I don't know, 8 to 9 feet deep where I'm fishing right here. I want to fish on the lower side right now because that's where I've been catching them, on the lower side of the middle, which I'm doing with the 6-foot crankbait. Now, if I wanted to fish a little higher, if I was moving to the right, if I was fishing a shallow bank line or something like that, I would be swapping over to a 3-foot. We actually just got tapped there, but no take. So it just depends. And there are channels out here where you can use a 23-foot crankbait and stuff like that. So if that's something you would like to do, I mean, have at it, bro. It's your life. You fish how you want to. I'm just showing you what works for me, and it may not necessarily work for you. So what you're probably going to see here is I cross that rock line, is you're going to see my bait shoot towards the bottom a little bit more, like that, right there. Don't be scared of that, right? You know, you might get hung up every now and then, but it'll pop back up. You should just be able to keep on reeling. I use a 1-speed. Sometimes a 2-speed works better. But 1 or 2. You never want to go to 3 or 4. You're not going to catch anything that way. And like I said, some people do a stop and go with crankbaits, and I've never really got the idea of that. I've never caught a whole lot of fish off of it, so I just kind of stay away from it. It's never been my thing. So we're going to see if we can't reel one in here shortly. I like to catch at least one fish when I do these tutorials, so you guys know I'm not totally full of shit. And it may not be the best method out there, but it's the method I've always used, and it's the method that's worked for me, so I tend to stick to it. These guys are bobber fishing off the front for Chinook, I believe. No, they're catching striper out there. So we'll see if we can't pull one in off this back channel. This is a fairly shallow back channel behind these rocks, so you'll see me get to the bottom a little bit, but for some reason I still... Yep, there's a fish. That's probably a bass if I had to guess. But crankbait fishing is one of the most simple ways to catch fish. I find it ridiculously effective, and you can cover a lot of water with it. So it's a lot of fun. It's really easy. There's not a whole lot to crankbait fishing. It's just matching what color are they biting on today, and what depth you need to be fishing at. So if you guys have any questions on maps, you know, water depth on some of them or some spots, general questions, I'm not really too good at the pinpoint questions, but I can try and answer them if you throw them out there. please ask them, and I'll be more than happy to answer them. And let me know what kind of basic tutorials you guys want to see, what lures you guys want to see how to work, stuff like that. This is going to be, like I said, an ongoing guide, Fishing Planet for Dummies. If you go to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/crewdoggamer, that's where you're going to find a playlist of Fishing Planet tutorials. Some of them are a little out of date, like the one, I keep it up just for reminiscence, where you could catch gar in Missouri, but that's most of the stuff in there is still applicable, especially the beginner's guide. I need to update that, but yeah, if you guys have any questions at all, please ask me, and subscribe if you like what you're seeing here. If you don't, that's cool too. Just let me know what you didn't like so I can try and fix it. And my social media will be down in the description, my Twitter and my Instagram. You guys can check out my cool army pics and my very few fishing pictures I have on there. I hope you guys learned a little bit of something on how to use a crankbait out here. Like I said, if you got any questions, please ask. I will see you guys later. Keep it crew. This is Crew Dog Gamer. Later, motherfuckers.